Is Rebecca Williams. She works with Open Data and is an information policy analyst with a background in law and city planning. She currently works as a digital services expert with the White House Office of Management and Budget, the Chief Information Officer, and is co-project managing strategy.gov or strategydata.gov and development of the first federal data strategy in support of the performance.gov/leveraging data, a cross-agency priority goal leveraging data as a strategic asset. Rebecca has also worked with Bloomberg, What Works, Cities Initiative, Data.gov, and the Sunlight Foundation on data access issues.
I don't know where the slides are. Is this on or no? Just talk loud. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk mostly about my past life working at Data.gov and sort of the transition of Data.gov to use a version of DCAT for the United States and like what that evolution has looked like. As mentioned in my intro, I got into all this government data stuff as a city planner, so a lot of my background was in comparing different like quasi benchmarks from different regions to make some city planning policy suggestions. And then I was in New York City when their open data law passed, started working for Sunlight as an advocate, started working at Data.gov as an IT specialist, trying to teach folks how to implement the DCAT, or the version of DCAT that I'll talk a little bit about. This might be, how many folks are already familiar with sort of the Project Open Data version of DCAT and that whole process? So a little of this might be like just overview for you all, but I want to talk a little bit, like zoom out what that has sort of meant for the larger ecosystem. But essentially, like I have a lot of mixed views about how useful Data.gov is and sort of what data catalogs can be, but I think those mixed views are helpful for this sort of presentation, so I just want to be upfront with that. I'm currently at OCIO, and like Julia, I have like a pitch. I present with a pitch, and there are two pitches. One is learn about the federal data strategy at strategy.data.gov. I'll go over that again at the end. That's not in this presentation. But the second one is hopefully going over sort of this Project Open Data spec and its relationship to Google and Europe and the web will inspire you to get involved with that metadata standard at the federal level, because it needs some attention, but I think we've done a lot of groundwork that will be really useful, and it's not even for a vision of a linked all data sets end goal, but just a lot of foundational work to make it easier to search across different government data catalogs. Okay, so that's an intro. So I'm going to go over three different things. One, sort of how Data.gov has evolved, two, DCAT itself, and then three, like how this has sort of expanded across different sectors. So Data.gov. Data.gov launched in 2009 with 47 data sets. It was just a crowded platform. People were literally uploading data sets in a central storage situation. It got mixed reviews. It wasn't all of the data possible. There was a single bottleneck. It was like a two-person team. This wasn't that long ago. And then in 2013, there was an executive order and an OMB memo, M1313, that said open data is a priority, and then also as part of this priority, we're going to have some specific implementation guidance to make sure that everyone is including like an enterprise data inventory and that it goes to Data.gov. As part of that effort, in addition to an EO and a OMB memo, there was also a guidance website stood up, which is still online today, that was meant to be a living repository of sort of how do you implement this end goal of making sure that all of your data is in inventory someday. In terms of like growth, Data.gov, through like all of these efforts, like the coupled policy efforts and the guidance and the routine meetings and the metadata approach, increased sort of the data they had represented on Data.gov by a lot, like 100,000 more than that now. Not that the number is really super important. So in terms of OMB implementation guidance. So OMB in that memo said, we're going to give you technical guidance about how you're going to inventory all your data sets. And they had a lot of presidential innovation fellows, these young up-and-comers that were like, let's look at sort of what's out there in terms of tools that we can use to implement this. So there's a big proponent. Project Open Data, I think, was the first GitHub site by a government to facilitate like discussion and standards conversations. And then also at the same time, DCAT was just being developed. So you'll see the final DCAT recommendation was in January 2004. So if you remember, that EO and memo were in May 2013. So the memo came out. We did sort of a first pass at a quote-unquote common core metadata standard that was loosely based on some of the DCAT discussions and some of the Dublin Core, which is like an underlying metadata standard that went to DCAT. And it was the first version. And then also, after the first version was out, it was pretty basic, like data set metadata standards like data set name, data set description, et cetera. The DCAT discussions were happening at the same time internationally with the W3C, and we had interactive comments on GitHub going and saying, like, this common core schema could be improved by all these DCAT suggestions. And then over the next year or so, started updating the schema to match DCAT more closely. And to achieve those updates, so I was working at DataGov at the time during this update. So essentially between May 2013 and you first were supposed to have your inventory up in November 2013 as the deadline. By November 2014, most agencies had a JSON file according to this metadata spec. It took that long for a lot of agencies to accomplish sort of this bare minimum of an enterprise data inventory. I was like on the phone with agencies where they were editing their JSON in Word because they had no other device to edit in, or also they weren't like the correct person to be doing the work, essentially. So like open data points of contact were established in agencies with varying technical skills, with varying technical tools, and being asked to implement this metadata standard for all of the agencies' data. And I saw a lot of things go wrong with that scenario. And then after we asked them to do that, and they had some minimal viable something, like hopefully their JSON was validating, we were like, oh, thank you for like your hard work putting some 40 data sets in your Word doc. Can you now update that schema to a more complicated version that aligns with DCAT? And in that ask, we had, so this slide, we go through the 1.0 to 1.1 update. We did like a series of conversations on GitHub for each field change. A lot of like outstanding issues are still on GitHub for some sort of like 1.2. We did a lot of field mapping. We did webinars. We were hosting like very routine meetings on this. And again, like having Phil Ashlock of Data.gov and me on the phone with folks and being like, okay, let's sort of like walk you through like what the transition might be. But that's all to say that we update a little bit more closely with DCAT, and that's a good thing. So these are some of the crosswalks to the Project Open Data, like V.1 versus 1.0, how it aligns with DCAT, schema.org, and then also CCAM was the platform that Data.gov transitioned to. I mentioned when it launched in 2009, it was sort of the SaaS product where you just uploaded data sets. It transitioned to this open source product that's, I mean, mostly the UK, but essentially Europe was sort of, the Open Knowledge Network was facilitating this open source version. So we had like clear crosswalks, and it wasn't just the United States doing it. We had a lot of international partners that we could talk to about it. In terms of DCAT itself, so I mentioned it's a W3C standard, so we look to the web, like how is the web saying you should organize data catalogs. Europe also did a lot of this work as well, and in my view has like gone a lot further than what the US has done. but it's to say that we're all sort of working from the same basic web format. The EU data catalog in particular, like they've drilled down like a lot further. They have different reasons for that, but there are different extensions of DCAT right now that governments are using all around the world for their data catalogs. So this is like the growth. There was an announcement. What do you think? There's an announcement a few weeks ago that Google has a dataset search now, and I was really excited about this. I know a lot of like my colleagues, so Phil at data.gov, and then some of the folks at NOAA that helped make sure that we were aligned with schema.org and all these things had been working for this for several years. But all of this is to say the hard work of sort of walking through agencies to get them onto like a very basic DCAT JSON standard has, I think, been really fruitful, and that like we can start moving even further ahead. So I mentioned it took about a year for agencies. We monitored with the Project Open Data Dashboard, and we're still monitoring there. If you Google Project Open Data Dashboard, we see how valid the JSON, this is from November 2014, which is, like I said, I think the watermark, if I'm remembering correctly, when agencies flipped and started having valid JSON for all of their data sets. But we're always monitoring, like, do you have broken links? Are you including licensing information? There's a variety of, like, automatic metrics for all of the federal enterprise data inventories, at least for the 24 CFO Act agencies. After the agencies, a lot of these agencies were procuring from a variety of data catalog vendors, and the vendors started baking in the Project Open Data Standard in their catalog offerings. So Socrata, I think, was the first, and then Esri, and then slowly but surely, I was just tweeting about this last night when I was preparing the slides, and Junar like tweeted at me, no, we're compliant now. But like Junar and Open Data Soft were probably the last to join the party, but essentially now if you're procuring any of these like popular data catalog SaaS products, except for CCAN, which has an extension, you can just automatically be compliant with Project Open Data, which is exciting because data.gov, maybe I should have mentioned this in the beginning, so now you're not uploading data sets to a Socrata product. You are hosting your JSON file, and then nightly or weekly, depending on what type of entity you are, data.gov is harvesting your metadata and just hosting your metadata, not hosting any sort of direct data set and doing nightly updates. So now agencies or other government entities have like direct control of what their catalog is. So practically speaking, so now if you go to any sort of like local government data catalog and you do /data.json, which is the standard for the Project Open Data URL, you can see all of these data catalogs have like a very consistent like Project Open Data version 1.1 schema up top, and everything is sorted the same way. In terms of data.gov harvest sources, so a lot of those are federal government sources, and we also have some harvest sources, or data.gov also has sources related to geospatial data standards, but essentially, like, hundreds of harvest sources are now going into data.gov. They're all using the same metadata standard, the Project Open Data version 1.1 version of DCAT. A lot of them are local governments as well, so you see like 28 city governments, but I know for a fact that a lot of city governments are compliant. They just haven't signed up to be on data.gov. So this is a blog post from like a year ago. The AI team at Google started investigating how do we make sure that we are indexing our data sets even better in Google search and or separately, and they were looking to the web the same way Europe and America did catalogs and the DCAT standard. And when they were looking at like what was out there in terms of what was already in the DCAT format, they realized all these technical challenges, which still exist for data.gov now, but I thought that it was illuminating to sort of see like their process to go through, like how do you catalog all the data, very whole Earth catalog type of problems. So defining what a data set is, identifying the data sets, relating them to each other. These are like the common problems that they had to come up with some sort of solution for. So now, as I mentioned, this is like a newer thing. There's a Google Dataset Search, and it will host anything that is like related to DCAT. There's a lot of data journalism data sets in there too. My favorite part of it, so this is a NOAA data set on the Google Dataset Search. So you'll see catalog.data.gov is there, and also the local.gov catalogs that it's hosted on, which also use the standard. But you also see the Amazon and Mirror site. So this is, you can see all the different places you might be able to locate a government data set now, all because we all sort of collectively decided with W3C leading that DCAT was like the way to go. This is very exciting for me as someone that realized when I was at data.gov, at least in the majority, it varies like how much day to day, but the web analytics of like a data.gov type of website, they're all sort of native Google searches, like 60 to like 80% of the ways you might arrive on data.gov is by Googling for something to begin with. And then also just sort of seeing these different challenges where people wanted to host it several different places and everybody coming in through search engines. And then especially with the Mirror sites, I know I was around for like a government shutdown, and they shut down like a bunch of websites, and then the government data was not available, but if you search it now, you can find some Mirror of it like very easily. But I definitely see like a positive trend forward in terms of what we started off with, this like centrally hosted 47 data sets nonsense, to sort of coming to a little bit closer to a consistent way to search across catalogs. So now Google themselves are encouraging folks to index their data with DCAT to be available via the Google Dataset Search, including journalist outlets and other folks that might not have been doing it that way. And they're just such a big player in the space. I think there's been a big transition between sort of encouraging some governments to do it to where we are today. Questions? Do you all want to file issues on Project Open Data now?